Covenants are important to the ways of our being in congregation, to our doing church as a community, to our living in ways of togetherness. In 2017, I preached 3 sermons on covenant the month after I began my work as the Toledo Unitarians minister, and long before we had a video presence at First Unitarian Church of Toledo. In 2024, when bringing a new sermon on covenant, I slightly revised and recorded the 3 earlier sermons. As a companion to the 2024 talk on congregational covenants, with the help of our producer-director Walter McGee and production assistant Julia McGee, who is also the acting president of our church board, I have included the 2017 talks as bonus content. This reading is from Unlocking the Power of Covenant, the June 2021 report of the UUA Commission on Appraisal. We are the promise we make and the vows we break. In this faith, Unitarian Universalism, covenants bind us together and strengthen our relationships. They create a pathway toward inclusiveness and, in times of both joy and sorrow, remind us that we are tough, resilient, and thoughtful. We become better people and often much more intelligent when we make the intentional choice to create connections and stand in a collaborative community with one another. Every Sunday at First Unitarian Church of Toledo, we recite the covenant of our congregation. It's drawn from 2 covenants in our Unitarian Universalist history. Reverend James Vila Blake, in 1894, when he was the Unitarian minister in Evanston, Illinois, introduced this covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Reverend L. Griswold Williams, a Universalist minister in Marion, Ohio in 1933, arranged this version. Love is the doctrine of this church, the quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. Here in Toledo, for our congregational covenant, the first part is from the Williams covenant, except ours says quest for truth instead of quest of truth. The second part is the middle part of the Blake covenant. I used Of Spirit, Truth, and Law as the title of today's talk because those are parts of the Blake and Williams covenants that don't quite match, and we use them slightly differently in our covenant. For us and Williams, love is the doctrine, while Blake said that love is the spirit. A truth phrase isn't in Blake's original. And Blake has service as the church's law, while Williams has service as the church's prayer. I wouldn't look at prayer and law in this context as a church and state separation aspect, but more in terms of religious history, going to Hebrew law and text, as in Moses' law being transcribed into Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I don't know when First Unitarian Church of Toledo started using this congregational covenant or how it came into our practice. Was it by meetings of members or a committee choosing how to express who we are? Did a minister introduce it and just keep it in the service week after week until it became a familiar segment of the Sunday service? The answers to when and how don't really matter today. The question I raise is, does this fit our congregation now? It's comfortable, it's part of our weekly ritual, but is it foundational to the Toledo Unitarians? As basically the same covenant as recited in many Unitarian Universalist congregations on Sundays, is it descriptive of Unitarian Universalism in general rather than the humanist, pagan, world religions, and especially Unitarian Universalist aspects we value in our Northwest Ohio multi-faith circles that include no faith? If we and many other Unitarian Universalist churches say basically the same thing, does that bring a touch of creedalism into our church? Are the words that many congregations say the best fit to be First Unitarian Church of Toledo's congregational covenant? It is descriptive of us to a large extent. And yes, some people have it memorized and really try their best to live by those words. Even so, though, are they our words? Might we make a covenant more fitting for us? This might be a good time to do so. In part, that's because there is greater emphasis on love in Unitarian Universalism, and we might bring that into our congregation's ways. With Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws now revised into a system of values all centered on love, does it fit well enough for us to say that love is the doctrine of this church? Might we learn through developing a new covenant what love at the center can be? There's also the aspect of the Merriam-Webster definition of doctrine in the dictionary's first entry, pretty much stating that doctrine is a synonym for dogma. And we like to say that we're a church without dogma. Plus, we're using covenant words that are almost 100 years old. We might not let covenant words become sacrosanct. At our ingathering this year, I called 2024-25 our church's year of renewal, partially in hope that we could re-energize as a congregation after the intense time of COVID, which is still with us, and asking that we rededicate ourselves to making this a congregation that makes a difference through the way we live liberal religion. Might we weave in calendar year 2025 as a year of covenant? Toledo Unitarians, will you think about developing our own congregational covenant? Work on your own or with me, but don't let this be a call that falls to the wayside. We can make a covenant just for First Unitarian Church of Toledo, as the congregational covenant is not a Unitarian Universalist denomination-wide creed. The Unitarian Universalist Association provides many educational and workshop materials related to covenants as encouragement for congregations to make their own covenants and operate within the structure of covenant. That's more open to spiritual practice than the rule of law, but we still appreciate law as rule and as service, another shout out to James Vila Blake, in our valuing the democratic process. For covenant forming, with involvement from our members, we could engage in a covenant writing and adoption process, and perhaps have a congregational vote at an appropriate time to adopt it, like we do for our bylaws. If you'd like, our Director of Lifelong Learning, your minister, or some members of the congregation who teach could help to design and present a framework for making a new covenant, or covenants, as there's one other covenant I think we need to have, one for right relations. So let me talk about that. I've spoken a few times over the past year about our behavioral covenant, noting that it's an aspirational statement without ways to address when behavior is not fitting for good congregational participation. It doesn't include language about a person being out of covenant, having upset our general order by lying and making false accusations, for example, directly confronting or spreading gossip, and how to get back in covenant, to restore trust, and to have goodwill among us, or indicating times when there could be no welcome for a church member to return to First Unitarian. So it's a covenant of how we want to be, not how we get through when we aren't in a good way. We developed the behavioral covenant in 2015, if I remember, through meeting with our then Unitarian Universalist Association congregational contact, Reverend Renee Rachotska, and forming the covenant language as a group. When it was finished, we encouraged members of the congregation to sign that original covenant. We have some copies of that congregational covenant posted around the church building, but it easily gets overlooked. Well, I think we need to pick that up now. In addition to the behavioral covenant, could we make a covenant of right relations? In part, that acknowledges that we church members aren't perfect people. And sometimes we can't fix broken ties. But with a right relations covenant, that's a way to patch things, to help us move forward, to acknowledge some of the complexity of being human and social and working together in covenant with right relations. Please think about it. Conflict is a too common part of congregational society. A few years ago, in our bylaws, we formed the Committee on Shared Ministry, and one of its responsibilities is to be the body to which people in conflict can come to try to achieve resolution, after they first talk person to person. Some people aren't comfortable with that first direct have a conversation aspect. Whether it's not wanting to speak for some reason, and yes, there are times when one of the people is the minister and the awkwardness of the relationship might be getting in the way for either the minister or the member, or speaking and the person not understanding, the Committee on Shared Ministry is a place to turn. The bylaws also state that if a resolution isn't reached with that committee, then it goes to the church board of trustees. Special circumstances might mean that our Unitarian Universalist Association congregational contact is consulted to provide an outside the congregation aspect. There are ways to address church conflict and disruptive behavior. And as I said, some church conflict is normal. With a congregational covenant of right relations, we better acknowledge that conflict is a part of being human, even in religious and spiritual life. And we can say, here's how that can be addressed. None of us is always good, and church helps us to be better, doesn't it? Will you, as a congregation, as people who are members of this church, consider bringing covenantal ways more to our being together? I can make the call to do this, but it doesn't work for me also to make the committees or to develop a covenant on my own and then say, this is yours. The month after I began my work as your called, settled, full-time minister, I gave a series of 3 sermons on covenant. I wanted to inspire us to use that sacred, that religious, that spiritual model to help First Unitarian Church of Toledo live its mission of fostering spiritual growth and compassionate action. And I think covenants have compassion at their core. And move to the realization of our vision to be a vibrant, inclusive spiritual community that achieves growth, visibility, and relevance. I preached that series in March 2017. In preparation for today's service and the ask I'm making to you about developing covenants, I slightly revised those sermons and, with the help of Walter and Julia McGee, recorded them as they were first given long before we started our YouTube channel. Those 3 sermons and today's talk are online now. I hope you'll watch them all. 7.5 years after that first series on covenant, and after many changes at First Unitarian and in the world, I'm asking us again to be a covenantal congregation. It really will help us to be a church people want to be part of. And doing the work of covenant building can help us to come together as a congregation with a common goal of living our liberal religion here and in the world and bringing others into our Toledo Unitarians circle. Thank you. So be it. Blessed be.